I've agreed to record my testimony, and I may actually end up referring to notes, not because I might forget what I want to say, but just to make sure I don't ramble on too long. Back in 1945, when I was born to an unmarried mother, I was placed in a Catholic orphanage in Birmingham. Now, my mother was an orphan, so when she was taken into the care system, they asked her what religion she was, and she said, "I don't know, I think Catholic," which is why I ended up in a Catholic mother and baby home. Now, I was adopted when I was 3 months old by a good family, and I had 3 brothers. I went to a Catholic primary school called St Mary's, and we certainly got into some serious Mary worship in that place. We used to go and pray to a statue of Mary in the school grounds, and it was put in the middle of a large fountain with water in. So while we were down there, when the nuns were watching, we were praying. When the nuns weren't watching, we were pushing ourselves in the water. But we were told we had to pray to Mary. We often used to go up to the school chapel, and again they had us praying a lot to Mary, singing special songs for Mary, and also praying to St Patrick, though at the time I never quite understood why. But I never got any answers from either of them, so I started to be a bit puzzled about this, and I wondered why they never said very much about Jesus. So when I was about 13, and I'd got into trouble for asking the nuns loads of questions like, why is it okay for the Pope to tell people they can't use birth control if poor people have too many children and can't feed them? I got smacked for that. And why does the Pope live in a palace and have all this money when there's poor people that need that money? But I got a bit of a slap for that one as well. So I didn't really take on board as much as the nuns would have liked me to believe in. But I knew from the age of 13 that somehow or other I wanted Jesus in my life, and I told him that when I was in the chapel. I continued to go to the Catholic Church to please my parents until I was about 16 years old, but really the only service I liked going to by that stage was the Stations of the Cross, or occasionally when they sung Mass, and they had some nice choir boys there, and I quite enjoyed that because my parents weren't there to watch me. I decided when I was 16, 17 that I'd had enough of all this stuff and what they made me do. It was too controlling for me, so I decided I'd stop being a Catholic and I'd sit back and wait and see what God did to me. I was expecting to be in a lot of trouble and that he'd come hunting for me, and I'd regret not going to the church because that's what I'd been taught. But actually nothing happened. So religion and I then were finished. Decided I didn't want to have any more religion in my life, and I never went back to church again until 1987. By that time I was teaching in Oswaldtwistle, and I was teaching a young girl called Gail, and I noticed something very different about Gail. She was very kind and always making peace when other kids were falling out. And I said to her, "Gail, you're different. What makes you so different from the others?" And she said, "Miss, it's because I'm a Christian." So I got chatting to her about what she believed, and she told me she went to church down in Aussie. So I asked her where the church was, and I thought I'd go along just to see what it was like. So I went down to Gail's church. It was called Melbourne Street. And I walked in, and I was confronted with a load of crazy people, all smiling, laughing even, hands in the air, singing, praising God. But they seemed to be having a really good time. And I thought, I rather like this. So I decided that I'd go the next week, and then it became a bit of a habit. And my daughter Rachel came as well. She liked going down there, and she liked some of the things they did with the youth group. Alan wasn't too keen. And he certainly didn't like when we put Christian music on in the house. He didn't like the sort of changes in us, but I never really understood why. Now, in Christmas 1987, we were invited to my youngest brother's house down in Salisbury, and we all went there to celebrate Christmas. And Frank, my youngest brother, got a keyboard out and started playing and singing. And I thought, that's a bit odd. He and his wife were singing the Christian choruses that we'd been singing in church. And the next thing was that Michael, my middle brother, got his saxophone out and he started joining in, and his wife joined in with the singing. And I thought, well, how do they know those songs? So I asked them, and they said, both of them, that within the past few months, they both felt that they should start going to a Christian church. And that was the whole family, children as well. So I thought, this is a bit surreal. And I looked over at my dad, and he was sitting in the corner with tears rolling down his face. I thought he was upset, and I said, Dad, what on earth's the matter? What's wrong? And he said, oh, these are tears of joy. Ever since my children all stopped going to church, I've prayed every single day that they'd all come back to God. That was interesting. He didn't pray that we'd come back to the Catholic Church. He prayed that we'd all come back to God. So I questioned God. I said, well, my dad has 4 children. So what about the eldest one? Because to my knowledge, he's not a Christian. And Dad had prayed for all 4 of us. Well, that prayer of my father's, that faithful prayer, was answered in 2000 when my oldest brother married a wonderful Christian lady called Annie from Alabama. She was part of Martin Luther King's church. She had a very strong faith. She's a beautiful, beautiful black lady. And her influence, I really thank God for her influence on Tony, because now Tony's a Christian. It had just taken Tony longer to accept Jesus than it had the others. Maybe because in life he'd been incredibly successful. He was a millionaire, and perhaps he felt he didn't need Jesus in his life. I don't know. That's just a guess. Anyway, in 2000, he flew the entire family over to Los Angeles and put us all up in a posh Hilton hotel so we could attend the wedding and the celebration of him and Annie getting married. Now, Frank, the youngest brother, and possibly my favourite, he moved to Canada. And I was sad about that. And I look back on it now and I think I know that God wanted him there and God has used him there powerfully. So it's wonderful. But for a while I was sulking a bit with God because he'd taken my favourite brother away. But we continue to have fellowship with my middle brother, Michael, because he lives in Warrington, so he's not far away. Now, in 1993, God told us to move from where we were living, which we're very happy in this particular place. In fact, God gave me a dream of looking at the little cottage we were living in from the outside and seeing different people inside the house. I was very puzzled, and I thought, I don't know why I'm looking at my own house and somebody else has moved in, but somehow I didn't feel that troubled. It was very strange. And not long after that, God said to us he wanted us to move to another house up in Nusden. And through many mind-blowing different ways, he confirmed through a number of people that's where he wanted us to be. And we set it up as a Christian centre. Now, that place was called London Smoke Cottages. And I remember one night saying to God, that's a very strange name. I wonder why this house is called London Smoke Cottages. I said, God, what would you call it? And he said, Fire and Water. So we actually called it Fire and Water. Now, we sometimes held teaching days in the barn which was attached to the house. Now, the Rev Kev Logan, who some of you might know, or the Reverend Arnott Bridges, Richard Priestley, and Roger King, who was an international evangelist and teacher, they all came to do teaching days there. About 60 or so people used to come, and we'd share food. And we only had one toilet, and God knew that was going to be a bit of a problem with 60 people. But miraculously, some money was sent from someone who wasn't a believer saying, I think you might need to use this for your house. And it was the amount of money that our builder wanted to actually build another toilet in the garage where there was water laid on already. So actually God provided for the second toilet for when we had 60 people. My brother Michael used to bring his worship band over from Warrington. So we had wonderful worship in the band. And that was a truly brilliant time. And we knew this amazing guy who used to come up and record some of the teaching. So people who weren't able to actually come to the teaching days could buy at cost copies of this teaching. And this lovely man, Mick, used to come and record it for us. We had a brilliant 6 years in Fire and Water. We had a youth group who were absolutely superb group of young people, many of them from the school I was teaching in, used to come up. And it fulfilled a vision that I'd had this vision of this huge room upstairs in the house with children sitting on mattresses on the floor. And I remember saying to God, oh, please, I don't say I've got to have loads and loads of sleepovers. Rachel's going to fill the house with noisy kids staying over. But it wasn't that. When we'd started the youth group, that's actually the room we used to meet in when it was a little bit cold, rather than go in the barn. We used to go and meet in this large room upstairs, and there were spare mattresses from 3 brothers that used to share this bedroom. They'd left the beds behind, and so I'd seen a vision of these children sitting on mattresses on the floor while Arnott was playing his guitar and singing and teaching them. So it was being confirmed all the way through when we were in that place that God was in it, and people said, why don't you set it up as a church? But we said no, because God hadn't told us to set it up as a church. He just said to run it as a centre for teaching and for helping young people get to know Jesus. Now, there came a time in about the last year that we were in that house through several miracles I managed to make contact with my birth mother. I'd always wondered where I came from and what my mother was like, but miraculously, in many different ways, God brought it about that we actually made contact with her. And then she said that she wanted to come up and live with us and buy a house for my birthday that we were looking to buy, which was down in Nusden. It was a converted church. And for 3 years, we'd actually been trying to buy that place. There was going to be a motorway built near ours and a lane cutting across our little access road, and it was going to make life difficult when the motorway was built. So we thought we'd move to this place in Nusden. But for 3 years, we tried to buy it. We'd filmed it, we'd taken our build around, but in the end, on the day my mother said she would buy it for us, or for me, for my birthday, the man said the building was actually sold. So we then asked God, where did he want us to live? So he showed us very clearly that he wanted us to come to Clayton, which wasn't an area that we were actually looking in. We were looking around Aussie. We wanted to be near where the young people were. But God showed us this place in Clayton, and that's where we've been for over 20 years. Now, in 1999, there came an opportunity for me to take early retirement. And I thought that would be good. I could spend more time with my mother, and I could go part-time. But she didn't settle. We built the granny flat for her, but she didn't really settle. So she actually left and went to Wales. So we asked God, what had we to do with the granny flat? Because it would have been a bit of a waste of money. But in the end, God one of the teachers at school who ended up without a home, she stayed for a year. So Sheila and Nigel Lawrence, who we knew very well from church, they stayed in it for a year. And after that, 13 different guys who were coming out of prison stayed for either short or a longer time and had it as their home. So God used it for his purposes. We carried on going into prison. We were going into 2 prisons. We were thoroughly enjoying it. But then Lancaster prison closed down. So we just carried on going into Weymouth prison, and we were doing that right up until the lockdown. But unfortunately, we've had to stop for the time being. We hope and pray we can get back in there. We've had an interesting journey with Jesus. Some of it totally miraculous. A small part of it very painful. But things got better when we came to Grace Church. And through it all, we've learned that we can always trust our faithful God. He will always guide us in the way we should go.